The war was over. The world was tired of blood. Europe was rebuilding its cities, its factories, its illusions. But beneath the ashes, something still breathed. A shadow waiting, silent. In 1945, the Nuremberg trials had promised justice. Cameras captured the faces of men who had orchestrated death with bureaucratic precision. Yet even as the gallows were built, many executioners of the final solution simply vanished into the smoke of defeat. Some were hunted. Most were forgotten. And one man, perhaps the most methodical of them all, disappeared without a trace. His name was Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann had not been a soldier drenched in blood. He was an administrator, a man of desks and documents, of timetables and trains. But through his orders, the railways of Europe became veins of death, carrying millions toward extermination. He was the architect of efficiency and genocide, the engineer of organized evil. And when the Reich fell, he fled into the shadows like a ghost, slipping through cracks in history. For years, his name was a whisper. His crimes were buried beneath the rubble of new wars and new alliances. Even as Israel was born in the deserts of 1948, even as survivors built lives upon the ruins of their memories, justice had not yet found its voice. But evil rarely disappears. It hides, waiting for the right silence to return. And one evening in the late 1950s, that silence began to break a rumor in a Buenos Aires cafe. A survivor's memory, a photograph too familiar to be coincidence. This is the story of what followed, of men and women who refused to forget, of a young nation, Israel, determined to show the world that justice does not fade with time, and of a secret service, the Mossad, willing to cross oceans, laws, and moral boundaries to bring one man to judgment. This is not just a story of espionage. It is a moral reckoning where justice and vengeance collide, and the ghosts of the Holocaust are called one last time to speak. The courtroom at Nuremberg was a cathedral of silence. In 1945, the victors of a broken world gathered to face the architects of destruction. Cameras rolled, translators whispered through their headsets, and history itself seemed to hold its breath. One by one, the men who had ruled through fear sat behind glass, their medals replaced by the emptiness in their eyes. They were no longer generals, ministers, or philosophers of the Reich, only men reduced to numbers, awaiting a verdict from humanity. But among them, a seat remained empty. The man who had designed the machinery of deportation, the one who had organized the trains to Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor, was nowhere to be found. His name echoed through the corridors like an accusation unanswered: Adolf Eichmann. At the trial, evidence piled up like mountains of ash. Films of liberated camps, testimonies of survivors, documents stamped and signed. The machinery of evil was exposed, but one of its key engineers had already vanished. Some believed he had died in the chaos of Berlin. Others whispered he had fled south, through secret routes run by sympathizers and priests. The Allies celebrated their justice. Yet beneath the applause lay unease. Could the world truly claim justice if one of the masterminds of genocide was still free? For the Jewish survivors who had lost everything, the answer was simple. Justice without Eichmann was unfinished. In Israel, a new generation of leaders and agents carried that memory like a scar. The Holocaust was not history to them. It was a wound, still bleeding beneath the soil of their newborn nation. They had built a state to protect their people from ever being hunted again. But now one of the hunters was still out there, living under the sun, unpunished. The ghosts of Nuremberg whispered their names to those who would listen. They did not ask for revenge. they asked to be remembered. And somewhere far from Europe, in the quiet suburbs of Buenos Aires, the man who had once signed death orders with calm precision was living under another name, believing history had forgotten him. But history was not finished with Adolf Eichmann. Not yet. The end of the war was chaos. Europe was a maze of ruins, refugees, and forged papers. In that confusion, monsters slipped away unnoticed. Adolf Eichmann was one of them. While the Allies searched for the visible symbols of the Reich, Eichmann vanished into the smoke, shaving his head, growing a beard, changing uniforms, like a snake shedding its skin. He wandered through the shadows of defeated Germany, aided by a silent network of former Nazis, sympathizers, and even priests who believed they were helping a lost soul, not a mass murderer. They called them the ratlines, secret escape routes leading from Europe's heart to distant continents. Through them, hundreds of war criminals disappeared, their past erased by new identities and the blessing of false baptism certificates. In 1950, under the name Ricardo Clement, Eichmann boarded a ship bound for Argentina. He was calm, even courteous, as he handed over his papers. To the customs officers in Buenos Aires, he was just another European immigrant seeking a new life after the war. No one saw the weight of 6 million souls in his eyes. Argentina was fertile ground for men like him. Under President Perón, thousands of ex-Nazis and collaborators had already settled there. They found work, homes, and the comfort of shared denial. In the quiet suburbs of Buenos Aires, Eichmann built a small house, found a job at a Mercedes-Benz factory, and tried to fade into the rhythm of ordinary life. He took evening walks with his sons, went to work punctually, paid his bills, and read the newspaper. To his neighbors, he was polite, reserved, unremarkable. To himself, he was safe. The world had moved on. Israel was young, busy with survival. Germany was rebuilding its pride. No one was looking for ghosts anymore, yet at night, in the stillness of his modest home, memories flickered. The sound of trains, the smoke over fields, the words "final solution" whispered in conference rooms. He had buried them under a new name, but guilt has a way of echoing in the dark. For 10 years, the world forgot him. But not everyone had forgotten. Somewhere in the distance, memory was waking up, and with it, justice was stirring from its long sleep. It began with a whisper. In 1957, a German prosecutor named Fritz Bauer received a letter from a half-blind Jewish man living in Buenos Aires. The man claimed that the notorious Adolf Eichmann was alive, living under another name, and that his sons boasted about their father's role in the final solution. Most would have dismissed it as rumor, but Bauer had seen too many ghosts return to ignore it. He contacted Israel in secret, not through the German police, who were riddled with former Nazis, but directly to the fledgling Israeli intelligence service, the Mossad. In Tel Aviv, the information spread quietly across narrow offices filled with cigarette smoke and maps pinned with strings. The Mossad was young, daring, and burdened with a mission larger than espionage: to defend a people who had nearly been erased. The question was immediate and dangerous. Could they, should they, cross international borders to seize a man living under another nation's protection? Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion hesitated. Israel was still fragile, surrounded by enemies struggling to feed its people. A failed operation abroad could shatter its legitimacy. Yet the weight of the Holocaust pressed upon every decision. Justice had been delayed long enough. A small team was chosen, men and women who carried the memory of loss in their blood. They studied photographs, interviewed survivors, memorized the structure of Buenos Aires streets. Their mission was absolute secrecy, identify, confirm, capture, and extract Adolf Eichmann alive. Months of surveillance began. Agents disguised as tourists and factory workers watched a modest house on Garibaldi Street in the quiet suburb of San Fernando. They noted routines. The same bus every evening, the same walk from the station. A man carrying a lunchbox, silent and punctual. He looked ordinary, almost timid. But when they compared his ears, his nose, his gait to old wartime photographs, the resemblance was undeniable. One night in a dimly lit safe house, an agent whispered, "It's him." A silence followed, not of fear, but of reverence. After 15 years, the architect of extermination had been found. The hunt was no longer just about justice. It was about the soul of a nation proving that memory could still strike back. On the evening of May 11th, 1960, the streets of Buenos Aires glowed with the last light of the day. The air was still heavy with dust and the hum of distant radios. Along Garibaldi Street, a team of Mossad agents waited inside a black Chevrolet, its engine off, their hearts pounding in silence. For weeks they had watched him, every day the same routine. The bus from the Mercedes-Benz factory, the walk down the road, the turn at the same corner. But this time, everything had to happen within seconds. There would be no second chance. Through the windshield, they saw him, a small, tired man in a gray suit, carrying a metal lunchbox. Nothing about him suggested he had once sent millions to their deaths. But the agents knew. They had memorized every photograph, every movement. The car door opened. 2 agents stepped out, pretending to fix the hood. As Eichmann approached, one whispered the signal word in Hebrew. In an instant, the quiet street erupted into a struggle. A hand clamped over his mouth, another pinned his arms. Eichmann thrashed, gasped for air, and then went still. They dragged him into the car, covering his head with a blanket. The car drove away into the darkness, headlights off. The mission had succeeded, but the danger had just begun. They had kidnapped a man on foreign soil. If caught, they could be imprisoned or worse. Yet in that car, none of them felt fear. Only the weight of history pressed upon them. For 9 days, Eichmann was held in a safe house outside Buenos Aires. The agents took turns guarding him, interrogating him quietly. He denied everything at first, insisting he was Ricardo Clement. But when they presented him with documents, signatures, and questions only Eichmann could answer, the mask began to crack. Finally, in a low voice, he said the words that froze the room. "Ich bin Adolf Eichmann. I am Adolf Eichmann." The confession was not shouted, not defiant, only resigned, as if he knew that the past had finally caught up with him. Now came the impossible part: smuggling him out of Argentina without detection. The plan was audacious. An El Al flight carrying the Israeli delegation for Argentina's independence celebrations. Eichmann, sedated and disguised as an airline technician, was escorted aboard by agents posing as crew. As the plane lifted into the night sky, one agent looked out the window at the lights of Buenos Aires, fading beneath them. He whispered, "Now justice flies." In Jerusalem, word spread quietly through government halls. For the first time in history, Israel had captured one of the architects of its people's destruction. The world did not yet know it, but history had shifted. The man who once believed himself untouchable was on his way to stand before the judgment of the living and the dead. In April 1961, the world turned its eyes toward Jerusalem. Inside a glass booth sat a small, balding man in a gray suit, his expression vacant, his posture stiff. Behind that glass was Adolf Eichmann, once a powerful officer of the SS, now a prisoner. A relic of horror, forced to face what he had built. The courtroom was silent when the judges entered. Survivors filled the benches, their faces marked by decades of memory. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, and translators whispered. For the first time, the victims of the Holocaust were not only remembered, they were heard. The prosecution spoke for millions. They read documents signed by Eichmann himself, orders, transport lists, meticulous schedules of death. The numbers were cold, but the testimonies burned. Mothers who had watched their children taken away, men who had walked out of the camps alone, voices trembling yet unbroken. Each word struck like a hammer against the glass. Eichmann's defense was chilling in its simplicity. I was only following orders. He claimed obedience, not hatred, duty, not guilt. He described himself as a cog in a vast machine, a man without choice, without responsibility. But as the world listened, that argument crumbled. The face of bureaucratic evil had never looked so ordinary, and that ordinariness terrified everyone. In December 1961, the court pronounced him guilty of crimes against humanity and crimes against the Jewish people. He stood motionless as the sentence was read, death by hanging. There were no cheers, no applause, only silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. On the night of May 31st, 1962, in a small prison near Ramla, Adolf Eichmann was executed. His ashes were scattered into the sea, so that no land would ever hold his remains. The trial left a mark deeper than any verdict. It forced humanity to look again at the nature of evil, not as a monster in shadows, but as an ordinary man who chose to obey rather than to think, to serve rather than to feel. For Israel, it was justice. For the survivors, remembrance. And for the world, it was a warning that silence, obedience, and forgetfulness can become the tools of evil when no one dares to speak. The ghosts of the past had finally been heard. Justice, imperfect yet necessary, had spoken. At the end of the story, one truth remains. Justice may come slowly, but it never forgets. The echoes of the past still call us to remember, to question, and to stand against the quiet rise of indifference. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share this video so that more people never forget what happens when silence replaces conscience. And in the comments, write one word justice to show that memory still lives.